Hey everybody, this is Darlene in Ann Arbor, Michigan on this snowy, frigid day, drinking my mud water. I have been on it for a couple weeks after a traumatic brain injury and severe headaches and dizziness and a bunch of other stuff. And just being able to drink this stuff and feel great for even a moment in time offers me hope in a long line of medical stuff in my life. So it's bringing sun and happiness to my day with my doggy Brady, named after the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. Thank you. Love my mud water.
Hey, Darlene. Hope you are healing up swiftly, and we're glad we can offer you a little brightness into your morning with mud water. If anyone else wants to send a voice memo in, just bust out your phone, record less than a minute of audio. Let us know who you are, where you're listening from, some details about what it looks like where you are right now, and email it to podcast@mudwtr.com. If we play it, we will send you a free box of mud. Welcome to Trends with Benefits. My name is Kyle Thiermann. Here we offer you short-form podcasts, and this one is with Jody Armour. Jody Armour is a criminal justice attorney and Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at the University of Southern California. Armour's expertise ranges from personal injury claims to claims about the relationship between racial justice, criminal justice, and the rule of law. Armour studies the intersection of race and legal decision-making, as well as tort and tort reform movements. In this episode, Armour talks about racial bias, Black Lives Matter, and understanding how we can move more towards a society that Dr. King would envision, one where we judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Please welcome to the show, Jody Armour.
Right. One of the first things you notice about a person walking down the street toward you is their race. A lot of times you'll notice their race before you can even know what gender they are. Right. To deny that is to deny that there may be both conscious and unconscious mental processes that are triggered when you see somebody of another race. Some of my early scholarship had to do with the cognitive unconscious and unconscious bias, and how it is that a lot of well-intentioned, otherwise racially liberal people can unconsciously discriminate against others without any conscious awareness of doing it, right? But it happens nonetheless. For example, one set of studies they had subjects watch two people have an interaction, and at the end of the interaction, one of them bumps the other in an ambiguous way. It could be horseplay and dramatizing and innocuous, or it could be violent and hostile or aggressive. They could have looked either way. And they found that when they controlled for every other variable, what they were wearing, what they actually said, the way they stood, that when they controlled for every other variable, when the person initiating the ambiguous bump was white, they systematically tended to interpret the bump as innocuous and dramatizing in horseplay. When the person initiating the bump was black, they systematically interpreted it as hostile or aggressive. Now, these people weren't necessarily bigots. In fact, both blacks and whites interpreted that way. Even young kids, as young as 7 and 8 years of age, made that same systematic discrimination in how they interpreted the ambiguous bump, because stereotypes are well-learned associations that are established in our memory from a very early age, like the little white girl who said in the New York Times piece when she saw a black infant, she said, "Look, a 3-year-old black infant," she said, "Look, Mom, a baby maid." Now, that 3-year-old white girl isn't a bigot. She's not prejudiced. She's just reporting on an association that's been forged in her memory between women from a certain social group and an occupation she typically sees them in. She may reach the age of judgment, say 18, and come to renounce that as an appropriate way to think about black women. But that doesn't mean that habit, that mental habit, that well-learned association disappears overnight, right? She has two different cognitive structures, both her personal standards for how she ought to respond, which may be egalitarian and race neutral, but the unconscious one, the automatic one. To understand automatic unconscious processes, think about when you learn to drive a car. When you first get behind the wheel, every maneuver requires intention, attention, and effort. How do you steering the wheel, hitting the gas, hitting the brakes? It takes a lot of effort. When I teach my kids how to drive a stick, a manual, for example, I always rent a car, because I know there's going to be a learning curve in which initially all of the associations and maneuvers are going to be hard to learn. But with enough practice, with enough repetition, they become automatic. You can do them without any conscious effort because they become part of your cognitive unconscious. You can drive down the street riding a stick shift, talking to somebody about healthcare reform because they're in your automatic processes. Then you can leave your garage sometimes, pull out and wind up and work and forget how you got there, not even be aware of how you got there because you made all the turns automatically because they were part of your cognitive unconscious. That's how stereotypes are. They're mental habits that can run automatically without our conscious awareness, and whether they're about gender or race or any other marker of social marginality, they can compel us to discriminate even when we're trying not to. And we got to recognize that in order to deal with it. To take an ostrich head in the sand approach to that is to deny the reality of everyday bias against outgroups.
What would you recommend? Let's just take me as an example. I'm walking down the street. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I see a black guy walking towards me, and I notice myself tense up a little bit.
Yes.
What are the set of questions you would recommend that I ask myself in that moment of unconscious bias?
Yes, that I can control my mental habit. Recognize that you have a mental habit. That doesn't make you a bad person. We all have mental habits. We all grew up in a cultural belief system that was replete with, saturated with negative stereotypes, right? So you are just a creature of habit, like we all are creatures of habit. And so at that moment, you can say, I want to control this habit, this mental habit of mine. And as you know, when it comes to controlling any habit, it takes intention, attention, and effort to control it. Conscious, like if you bite your fingernails whenever you're sitting in front of the television, you want to break that habit. Whenever you sit in front of the television, you have to consciously call to mind your new resolution for how you're going to respond when you're in front of that television, how you're not going to start chomping on those nails. So by the same token, when you're walking down the street, you see somebody from this stereotype group coming from you, you're having this automatic habitual response. You have to tell yourself, I'm not going to succumb to that habit. I'm going to control myself, my automatic responses, and I'm going to, in the name of egalitarianism or in the name of equality, in the name of being the kind of person I want to be, who treats everybody fairly and on the up and up, I am going to control this mental habit, and I'm not going to let it get the best of me.
Right.
In other words, color consciousness, not color blindness, is what you need to practice. You need to not try to deny that you are a creature of habit, that you're human, but rather wrap your arms around your humanity, recognize it, and combat it through color consciousness.
Yeah. No, there's a real terror in our society of being called a racist.
Yes.
And that terror makes it very difficult to engage with these kinds of topics in any capacity.
Yes.
I mean, I even feel it right now, like engaging this conversation, not wanting to sound racist in any way, I want to frame up these questions in a way that will make me sound well-informed and not racist, which is, it's more difficult than if we were just having any other kind of conversation.
Yes, and I think the key to getting a handle on that is to recognize there's a difference between stereotypes and prejudice. That's how I talk about it in some of my scholarship, that stereotypes are these mental habits. They're these well-learned sets of associations that are established in our memory from a very early age and can run automatically without our conscious awareness. Whereas prejudice is a personal belief system. It reflects your personal standards for how you ought to respond to the world. A lot of people who are non-prejudiced, who don't have bigoted beliefs about others, conscious beliefs, who really try to be fair and egalitarian, are nonetheless have stereotypes established in their memories. They nonetheless automatically and unconsciously respond to people who are different in a discriminatory way. So there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that you have these mental habits and embracing the fact that you are striving to be a person who is tolerant, who is open-minded, and that in trying to be that kind of person, you're going to have to combat some of these mental habits, some of these stereotypes have. So there's a big difference between stereotypes and prejudice. And all of us, even black folks, have a lot of stereotypes about other black folks that they have to fight. When some of these tests some of these experiments I was telling you about, when they have the ambiguous bump by the white versus the black person, and when they're black, they tend to interpret it as negative and white as innocuous. Both black and white subjects have that same reaction. So it's something that we all learn. That doesn't mean that the black people are prejudiced against black people. They're not prejudiced against their own brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and children, right? But they don't have any prejudice against them, but they still have unconscious biases that we all develop living in the kind of cultural belief system we do.
Mm-hmm. And let's take it to prejudice. There are a lot of people with prejudices. Let's say that I grew up in a home with a racist dad. Let's say that my sister was raped by a black guy.
Yes.
Right? That's going to create a lot of prejudices in my mind. And then maybe I'm more openly racist. What are ways to deal with that?
Yeah, well, now you're talking about appealing to some people, to folks on the basis of the higher angels of their nature. You know, Clarence Darrow was asked to come out of retirement back in the 1920s when a black man moved into a white suburban neighborhood of Detroit, and he was greeted by a neighborhood improvement association of about 200 whites who wanted him out of that neighborhood. And the next night, about 500 came and urged him to get out of that neighborhood. Well, he holed up in the house with his wife, his child, and some family members, and an ample supply of ammunition and guns. And so when the crowd lurched toward the house on the second night, he shot over their head. He said he intended to shoot over their head, but he hit someone in the crowd, caused their death, and then everyone in the house was arrested and charged with murder, except the baby. Everyone was charged with murder. And Clarence Darrow came out of retirement to represent him. And Clarence Darrow said to the jury, and back in these days, you have that all-white, all-male jury, and he's arguing for this guy, black man's life. And Dr. Ocean Sweet was his name, the black defendant on trial. And Clarence Darrow, in his closing argument, appealed to the jury to think about what their life would be like if they were black. You know, would they have black dreams? He said, if you went out here on this street right now and had your leg cut off by a streetcar, would you rather have your leg cut off by a streetcar or be black? And he knew that the answer to that jury is they'd rather have their leg cut off than be saddled with the burden of that particular social identity. And he said, you know, finally, who are we as Americans? Let me appeal to your higher principles. You know, you may have some prejudices, but on a higher level, what does that flag mean? What is the blood that those revolutionary soldiers fought for? What did that really mean? Weren't they fighting against hierarchy? Weren't they fighting against oppression? And if we really wrap ourselves around, wrap the flag around ourselves and wrap ourselves, our arms around what it means to be an American, then we should want to stand in solidarity with this black man trying to protect his home and his family. And so that's what you have to do. Try to, I think, appeal to people beyond their prejudices and on the basis of their deeper values. Because I think a lot of us have deep values that are in some ways recognize humans as humans and the human, you know, family as fundamentally, on some level, unified in some way. And it's not going to be easy. It's often going to be hard. You know, it's not an easy transition, and it's going to take friends and family, you know, to urge you in that direction. And maybe, you know, it's going to take you exposing yourself to books and literature, movies, and that's really what Black Lives Matter has been about, right? Now, that's a trigger for a lot of people. Black Lives Matter, right? But the point of Black Lives Matter, they had really and have two hallmarks to their methodology. One, shut it down. We need to cut through our complacency about the marginalization of blacks and the suffering that blacks are currently experiencing, even though many people don't think that's the case. If you don't think that there is still discrimination in America, go down to Skid Row here in L.A., and what you'll see is that 75% of those people in Skid Row, which is really one of the most miserable places in this nation, are black. Go into San Quentin with me, and you'll see that 60% of the prisoners, staggering numbers, are black. The two most miserable places in this country, our prisons and our Skid Rows, are grossly disproportionately populated by black folk. So if you don't think there's still discrimination today, then you have to really ignore all the evidence of your senses. And so the number one point of Black Lives Matter is shut it down. Let's cut through our our collective complacency about the marginalization, oppression of our black brothers and sisters, number one. And then number two, and the second, after we've shut it down, uncomfortable conversations. Let's have some uncomfortable conversations so that we can get to what really matters and get to the humanity in all of us. Black Lives Matter doesn't mean only Black Lives Matter. Some critics have tried to caricature it in that way. What it's really saying is Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter also. That too or also is implied. It's just left out. Right? It's not that only Black Lives Matter. Of course not. Once Black lives start to matter in America, all lives are going to matter because, like I said about Skid Row, those black lives are the faces at the bottom of the well. Once those lives start to matter, a lot of other lives are going to have to matter at the same time,